So today I'm going to present you the research which was the object of my doctoral dissertation, which began because of the fact that I found that it was surprising that Judeo-Hispano-Moroccan community felt so intensely committed to Judeo-Spanish repertoire within their identity formation in seeming contradiction to their lived reality. This commitment continued to be strong even though the practice tradition itself was almost completely forgotten and obsolete. Moreover, the themes of the repertoire did not seem to correspond at all to their lives. Various studies had been done during the 20th century on this Sephardi Moroccan repertoire, and these studies usually focused on the Spanish roots of the texts of the Romancero, which are generally considered to be the most ancient and the most important, thus the most studied. But a desire to guard a repertoire that was purely Spanish only because of nostalgia did not seem to address the fundamental issues of its internal functional mechanism within the community itself. So, I wanted to first understand why this community kept the importance of these songs, even though they seemed to have nothing in common with their lives in Morocco. And that in a surprising fashion, many of them were focused on topics of sex and the violence that was generated from sexual infractions to accepted societal rules. Secondly, I wanted to discover if the songs had metaphors or pertinent messages for the community, and if this were the case, what they were, and what could we understand about them and their internal rules thanks to the repetition of these messages kept and transmitted by women. Thirdly, I wanted to understand the mechanisms and reasons for the interpenetration of liturgical, humorous, exemplary, historic, and satirical repertoires, and how this entanglement functioned for their multi-dimensional identity construction until our days. Keeping in mind that these communities are almost completely gone from their original geographic emplacement in Morocco today, it seemed very important to me to see what remained of the repertoire in Morocco today, during this transitional moment before the complete disappearance of these communities of northern Morocco, and if that might give some clues about the core which impulses the totality of the repertoire, which is markedly identity supportive. I then refocused my question to the following: what internal function does this complex repertoire have to ensure and impulse the continuity of this minority? My research strategy was based on participant observation, followed by informal interviews, and later by recorded interviews during a period of 10 years, from 2007 to 2017 in Morocco. This allowed me to gather numerous oral histories from 115 informants and to gather recordings of 153 different songs from their repertoire. It must be noted that this community is a very private, secretive, and hermetic, almost impermeable community in regards to its inner mechanisms. So the reason that I was actually able to penetrate is because of my own native Spanish speaking, the fact that I'm an observant Jewish woman, and I was able to nourish personal connections which allow me to enter into the private sphere of many of the last members of this community who had witnessed a world that had all but disappeared today. There was a transmission that occurred between them and myself, partly because I'm a woman, observant, and a singer of this tradition. They saw that I was working towards the inscription of this Jewish repertoire into the national heritage of Morocco. It was the slow collection of these materials that allowed me to revisit and deepen the questions that came up during my fieldwork. Okay, I think this is out of order. Okay, I'll come back to this, but 4 important points came through from the recordings. The issue of memory loss. Most of the repertoire is forgotten. Most of the people only remember short phrases, pieces, and sometimes they remember nothing at all, except for a vague memory of what their mothers, aunts, and grandmothers sang. But they keep feelings which are very powerful reminders of the songs of their ancestors. Just to evoke the songs brings up these visceral feelings immediately. So I'm gonna see, I have a sound example here. I don't know how to make it actually
Sí, yo me la
There you go.
Sí, hablo español.
Ok, ahora damos a la novia por Michelle, Shokron.
Damos a la novia que por ella vinimos, si no molada a la casa volvemos. Damos a la novia que por ella vinimos. Ya no conozco las palabras.
Gracias.
La melodía de...
There he says, I don't know anything else. That's it. That's all I know. The second issue is the issue of humor, laughing around the songs.
Ya. Al entrar a la judería, lo primero que se ve, ay, 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 lo primero que se ve, ay, 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 lo primero que se ve. Abamí tostando pipa, abamí tostando pipa, llévalas, tráelas, audéalas. Y esa es toda la canción.
Haketia.
Pues por eso te estaba yo hablando lo de la Haketia. Audéala es una palabra española y árabe. Awed en árabe quiere decir vuélvela a hacer. La transformas tú con el español, dalas, audéalas, y ya hiciste la Haketia.
So there she explains about the title of the song, Haudealas, and how it's actually a collapsing of Spanish and Arabic. The third issue that came up was remembering historic moments from within the community. Many amongst them talked about the feelings of reliving past moments when they sang. They could even see the disappeared people and places, and had the feeling of a sort of unification, a collapsing of linear time, a unification of the present moment with the past.
Señores, voy a contar, señores, voy a contar una historia que pasó, una historia que pasó. Con Menachem ben Shetrit, con Menachem ben Shetrit, y sí, mila de amor, y sí, mila de amor, que por pedirla un clavel, que por pedirla un clavel, de bofetada le dio, de bofetada le dio.
And the last element is this revival or recuperation of a lost world. Various informants, generally of a quite advanced age, would open the door of their memory to bring details and songs that belong to a world which is lost for us, which is as lost for us as it is for them. These recordings help to place a context around previous recordings on the large Judeo-Spanish community from Morocco and their relationship to the messages inscribed within this repertoire. And this is Madame Harous, the wife of Elias Harous, who's taken the photographs. So she's from Tétouan. She's 101, and Ad Be'ave Esrim, may she live a long and healthy life. If I can only make this. Wait, here we go. Well, I don't know how it's gonna. There we go.
Y en su cintura que lleva las armas del rey. Este hombre que usted dice ya es muerto, madrume, y en su testamento dice que me case con usted.
My work is based on interviews, field observation, and also on the texts and melodies of the songs, which have been studied previously by multiple scholars since the beginning of the 20th century. But I also took into account 3 unpublished song manuscripts, which I discovered from 1897, 1913, and 2006, which allowed me to identify that the integration of external, what I call external, which is non-Jewish repertoire, was not just a product of modernity, but had always been the case, as we've seen with what Jonathan just said in the previous panel. At the beginning of my work, I should clarify, I did not find these non-Sephardi repertoires to be of use or interest for my own project. It was only later that I understood clearly the symbiotic relationship between the external and internal repertoires. What I found the most important was to demonstrate how the central theme of each song, connected to other criteria, such as context and moment of performance, gives it a particular symbolic function. I created a gargantuan table of every piece of the repertoire which I had collected with all of its various aspects to allow me to obtain a panoramic vision of the totality of their repertoire. This was only possible by extracting the core of each song, which justified its symbolic function and its use. The texts, their meaning, and themes were always central to women's discussions around the songs. However, the melody was not. Men would refer to the melodies in the case of using one of them within the liturgy as a contrafacta, as a borrowing, right, to remember a female ancestor because they were the songs de las judías, of the Jewish women. So they were given an appearance within the synagogue. This usage of women's melodies created a Judeo-Hispanic Moroccan specificity within the traditional Hebrew liturgical texts within the space of the synagogue. For the women, the melody of the text could change. What was most important was to pass the message of the song. It is what we call in French la communication médiatisée, or mediated communication. So I structured my study in 5 sections to understand this preponderance importance of the repertoire that's almost completely forgotten and that has almost completely disappeared from the imaginary of the Judeo-Hispano-Moroccans. My question was, and remains, when almost everything has been forgotten, what is it that remains, and why is it that remains and not the rest of the repertoire? So to look at this, I began with a historical look at the Jewish community, just to set a context. I proceeded to create a classification for the repertoire that I collected, concentrating on internal and external categorizations in the attempt to create a new categorization which crosses both previously done scholarship with local customs and nomenclature. My main interest was to concentrate on the function and context of performance, to understand and help others to understand the relationship that this community has to its complete repertoire. It was the very focus of an acts of repertoire's functionality, and not just the texts and the melodies, as has been done in the past, that allowed me to analyze the totality of repertoire and the ensemble of functions which are necessary for the community's stable functioning. The symbolic functions of the whole repertoire and the foundational dynamics that impulse their continued performance are concentrated on 3 principal issues. One is identity construction, the second is the maintenance of the boundaries of the group, and the third is the celebration of fertility. In the 3rd section of the study, I look at orality and the various spaces for negotiation of power in Maghrebi and Judeo-Spanish world. Orality is obviously fundamentally important in the Maghreb, and within it we already find the delineation of gender, masculine and feminine, and private and public spaces, as well as the sacred and the profane. The most important anchoring element of identity occurs within the private sphere and the primordially feminine connection to the ancestral identity-rich space. I'm also interested, though, in the liminal world of communal meetings, pilgrimages, and communal celebrations, because these are actually very rich, because during these moments and these spaces, it is when women pass the most important information to the community as a whole in this semi-public and sacred vernacular space. The next focus of what I looked at is the moment and the context of performances divided according to the moments of an individual's life, community life, weekly and daily cycles in connection to both solar and lunar calendars. Once I separate the repertoire according to its moment and context, I found stark demarcations of the repertoire of both individual or communal moments. The issue of the connection of the 3 holidays of pilgrimages, which were originally agricultural festivals of the Jewish calendar, to melodies from female repertoires in the liturgy confirms the connection between woman, land, fertility, and Torah. The last section of my study focuses on the role and function of women's songs in the transmission of identity. In fact, it is the ritual function of the protection of lineages through the restriction of uncontrolled female sexuality that protects the sexuality of the group and thus assures the spiritual transcendence of the community as a whole. This is effectively a confirmation that it is women that ensures the tahara, or the ritual purity of the group. they are then transformed into sanctified sexuality, which ensure the transmission of the specificity of the group and is still celebrated during songs intoned during the Noche de Berberisca on the eve of the wedding. During this ritual, we find in the 21st century all 5 categories of songs that belong exclusively to the group: romances, cantares from the life cycle, satirical songs, paraliturgical coplas, and liturgical songs. The moment of the Berberisca becomes the moment of the group's transmission, the group's Judeo-Hispano-Moroccan specific identity in contemporary times, when all other previous contexts have receded and left only this one functioning ritual moment during the life cycle. It continues to fulfill the function of the central transmitter of the group's identity at the very moment in which the woman's sexuality becomes sanctified in the interest of the group's survival. Linked to the ritual becomes the mechanism of ancestral transmission, and the repertoire sanctifies the woman's body. Time stops and the bride is transformed into a Sefer Torah. All the other functions of the repertoire are secondary and support this essential function, which is the exaltation of the purity of lineage. Here are the principal results of my research and the first series of conclusions which I wish to present today. Sorry, it's in French, but you can kind of understand, right? So these are the different parts of the repertoire and the way that they seem to connect to the inside and the outside of the community. The repertoire has a primary function of guardian of the group, which is why it is found at the heart of the concentric circles of the graph which I created. One of the points that are the most significant about the transmission of identity within this group is that it is performed through elements that derived from the cultures of contact, through an oscillation between its repertoire, which is exclusively internal, and the repertoire of the quote-unquote external world. Men sing internal and external melodies during the liturgy, and women sing these external songs with children during moments of great intimacy, just as when putting children to sleep. This could maybe explain why it is that a repertoire which is Spanish, the romancero, is considered today to be a repertoire of exclusive Judeo-Hispano-Moroccan identification of cultural specificity. This repertoire finished its process of assimilation as belonging to the group. This probably began as soon as they arrived to Morocco after the expulsion. There are other repertoires which I have classified as miscellaneous, Israeli, French, and Spanish. They are found in their soundtrack or their soundscape of the community, but they're often found during moments that are educational about the multiplicity of elements of Judeo-Moroccan identity. The discovery I have made within this research is that the ritual function of the maintenance of the purity of the group has permitted the conservation of that which remains of the repertoire, simply because of its function of marking the identity and specificity of the group. The repertoire elucidates the central ritual role of women's songs and the bride's body, which is almost mystical. The repertoire in and of itself carries the survival of the group as a specifically identified cultural group. These songs and rituals maintain the group as a defined and particular Judaism within global Judaism. This confirms the centrality of feminine contributions within a system that is highly patriarchal. Women resist the political project of the total homogenization of world Judaism by acculturating to an international Judaism. Through the maintenance of these traditions which mark the specificity of the group, they maintain its lineages. Apart from issues around gender and concentrating more on issues of transmission of a minority group facing a majority, the questions to follow through on are, is this a mechanism of the use of a minority group through their voice recurrent? Is it the segment of the population which helps to maintain the boundaries of the entire societal group, the one which has the most power towards its future? Is it eventually the group which holds the least power within a society and which is the guardian of its traditions, of their transmission and continuity of the group, that ultimately carries the heaviest load when one looks at the macro dynamic of the group with the majority society that surrounds it? What is the relationship between the internal and external world in relation to these voices that ensure their continuity and transmission? these are the questions that my current research is addressing. Thank you very much.